Okay, and we're going to learn a talk of the Rebbe. We're learning a talk of the Rebbe. Good evening, Reb Shimon. A talk of the Rebbe from Tetzava, Parsha Zochor. The year is 1972. Yeah, here we go. The year is 1972. Okay, let's bring this up here. So it says like this: Sicho Shabbos Parshas Tetzava Parsha Zochor, Yud Aleph Adar, the 11th of Adar, Tavshin Lamed Beis, 1972. Kvoi Kiddush Ad Mishlita Kiddush Al Yain. The Rebbe made Kiddush on wine, like you would do at the beginning of a Farbrengen. And the Rebbe started to speak as follows. Yom Shabbos Kodesh Zeh Nikra Shabbos Parsha Zochor. This Shabbos is Parshas Zochor. Al Shem, why is it called Zochor? Which means to remember. Al Shem Parsha Zochor is Amalek, because of the part of the Torah that we read, which is to remember what Amalek has done to you, which we read at the end of the reading of this week's Torah portion. Shebesim v'chaisim kriyas Torah, which you read at the end of the Torah portion. Kiven shakol hoylech achar achisam. So the why we call the Parsha Zochor, Shabbos Zochor, is because we read it at the end. So everything goes as you finish something, or you conclude something, that kind of sets the tone of what's the topic at hand. So therefore, the Shabbos gets called out how we finish the reading, which is Zochor. Means we could say that maybe we should emphasize that it's the Tzava, but we call it Zochor because that's the main reading, because we finish with it. The Rebbe continues. Therefore, as we know that the Haftorah, which we usually is connected to the final reading, sorry, Sharon, I'm just going to put you on mute. Some noises coming over. Unmute yourself if you have anything to add. So, because the Haftorah is connected to the end of the reading. What do we learn about in the Haftorah? Also about the war of Amalek. That's the story of Shmuel, Samuel, the prophet, and King Saul. But the reading of the Haftorah is, in addition, so to say, furthering the conversation of Amalek, because in the Torah we just talk about the law to remember what Amalek did. And in the Haftarah we talk about the destruction of Amalek, at least at the time when Saul and Samuel destroyed Amalek. So it says, remember what Amalek did. Therefore, because you should remember what they did, I'm commanding you to eradicate their memory. And don't forget, when it comes to the Haftarah, it talks about the actual first battle with Amalek. Vayach Shaul as Amalek, and Shaul, King Saul, slaughtered Amalek. Ad Vayishosef Shmuel as Agag, until the end of the Haftarah, when Saul did a little bit what he wasn't supposed to do with certain things with regard to the war of Amalek. Afterwards, Samuel the prophet beheaded, or kind of he actually cut in half Agag, the king of Amalek, which was the king at the time. That's why, because he lived a little bit of time, Haman is called Haman Hagogi, because he's a descendant of Agag, who quickly impregnated a woman in those few hours, I guess, that Saul left him alive. V'hainu, also, we find the reading of Purim is in addition to the reading of Shabbos Zochor, or Parsha Zochor. Asiya legabi schira, because in Parshas on Purim we talk about the action, which we'll see in a second, and on Shabbos we talk about the memory. Kedivrei Gemara b'negei Purim shechol yisberev Shabbos. What happens if Purim falls out on a Friday, like this year? Rav Amar Magdimim Parshas Zochor ki hechi delay sigdam asiya leschira. Shnemer vayam elu niskarim v'nasim shtei haskaras and koydem asiyasan. So the question is, when do we read? What do we read first? So the Gemara says we read first Zochor before we read. It's first because the pasuk says that hayamim niskarim. First you have to remember, then do. So first we do the reading that's connected to Zochor, and then we connect to the reading that's talking about the action of what we should do when it comes to eradicating Amalek. And what's the connection? Why do we read more about the action of the destroying of Amalek, more about the commandment to remember Amalek? Because, like I said before, on Purim was kind of the idea of eradicating Amalek, because Haman himself was a descendant of Amalek. He was a Hagagi. Hagagi was a descendant of Agag, the king of Amalek. He was a descendant of Agag, the king of Amalek. Obviously, he wasn't a son, because it was many years later, but he was a descendant. Also, when we learn in Daf Torah, when we read about the fall of Agag, the king of Amalek, so the Rebbe is basically saying, the Rebbe always likes to kind of bring in, that's because we read about that we have to remember what Amalek did. And then in the Haftorah, we read about the destruction or the initial destruction of Amalek. He hasn't been totally eradicated because Saul didn't do a complete job. So we already have the action. And then again, we read about the action on Purim, which affects also that we should be able to destroy Haman, which is a descendant of Amalek. Okay, let's see where the Rebbe is getting with this. We have to take, what is the lesson of the idea of remembering what Amalek has done to us? So there's two ideas here. There's remembering what Amalek has done to us. That's one mitzvah. Remember what Amalek did. Zochor, Amalek, don't forget. And then there's the commandment of the doing of the destruction of Amalek. So what's the lesson we could take in our lives as individuals in this world? For all the Jewish people of all the generations of all times. We know we have to read every year at least once Parshas Zochor to remember what Amalek did. It's not just to remember once upon a time what happened. It's a commandment that's connected to us today. So the Rebbe says, what's the lesson today we could take from the commandment of both remembering and destroying Amalek? Like it says in the part of to remember what Amalek did, it also commands us, don't forget. Al Meis, Koil Gam Amalek, Kivan Shirashayim B'chayim Karim Meisim, V'lacham Kam Lachim Misa V'Payil Hu Yud Beis Chodesh. How long does a person remember the dead? Only 12 months. That's why we have the Kaddish is 11 months, or maybe not to make it a full year. But the time a person starts to kind of been able to a little bit lift the pain of a death is after 12 months. So 12 months is the period of time where you remember. So therefore, each year we have to remember what Amalek did. So we shouldn't forget, because forgetfulness, it happens on a yearly basis. Therefore, when a person's about to forget what Amalek does, we read it again to remember what Amalek did. Of course, we always mention Amalek every day in the Sheishes Chiras. We're talking about reading it biblically in the Torah. So, and the Rebbe continues, we can understand this more based on what the Rambam teaches us. That mitzvahs say there's an obligation, a biblical commandment. Lischor, to remember Tamid constantly. Maisav haroyim, the bad deeds, va'arivasai kidei la'oirer, avosai shenemer Zochor. To remember the bad deeds and hate, to awaken our hate for Amalek, like it says to remember. Obesefer mitzvahs, that's what he says in the Rambam, and in the book of mitzvahs of the Rambam, which is a special section of the Rambam, is he says, Lisnei oisi b'chol eis ve'eis. We must hate Amalek constantly, all the time, eis ve'eis, and all the times. Ukemuven gami apsak din shmeiver Rebbeinu Zaken, as the Alter Rebbe brings down. The Shulchan Aruch, in the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, Zechiras ma'isa Amalek mitzvahs asay shater b'chol yom. To remember the actions of Amalek is in a biblical commandment every day. We should say it next to the time we remember Shema. When we recognize the greatness of Hashem's name, we should remember that also to apply that from the greatness of Hashem's name, we should be able to destroy Amalek and remember what they try to do to us. That's why we say Sheishes Chiras around in the Shachris davening. Therefore, the Rebbe says this has to be. It's so important. We see the importance. What the Rebbe is emphasizing here is that we have first the reading before Purim about remembering what Amalek did. Don't forget. Then we read about the Haftorah, what Saul and Samuel did to Amalek. On Purim again, we read about Amalek because of the destruction of Haman, which was a descendant of Amalek. We have the laws of the Rambam, the Alter Rebbe, of the obligation to constantly remember what Amalek did. So what's the lesson? It's obviously there's a lot of time and energy dedicated to the eradicating and memory and not to be forgetful what Amalek did. There has to be a lesson for us. For every man and woman, B'nai Yisrael, B'chol Daris, in all the generations, Kulam Ad L'Dereinu Zeh, all the way to our time. So now the Rebbe goes to explain. When it goes to, when we have to analyze the commandment of remember what Amalek has done to you, there's something wondrous. At the end of the day, we know when it comes to mitzvahs, it all comes down to the bottom line. Did you do the mitzvahs? Did you not do the mitzvah? The main thing is, it means that you could study about a mitzvah. You could study about tefillin, study about lighting Shabbos candles, but it comes down to, did you light the candles? Did you put on the tefillin? So too, when it comes to the memory of what Amalek has done, it's not enough that we should just remember what they did. Whether it's in our heart or in our mouths. The main idea is, like in every mitzvah, the idea is that the memory of something should bring to an action. And the Rebbe is obviously going to ask a question that doesn't apply to Amalek. We find that there's an idea of remembering on its own. The Rebbe adds, of course, we do have mitzvahs that are in speech. And it's considered an action. Like, for instance, prayer, the movement of the lips, or Talmud Torah, the movement of the lips is considered an action. As the Alter Rebbe explains in the Tanya. That's only if the completion of the mitzvah is speech. So the completion of studying of Torah is the speech. The completion of prayer is the speech. So therefore that is the action. But when it comes to Amalek, it's not enough just to remember. We have to eradicate them, which is an action. Eradicate the memory of Amalek. They shouldn't exist anymore. So we do see, when it comes to Amalek, there's a continuation to the law, to the mitzvah, which is to eradicate them. So the Rebbe asked the question. If there's a specific mitzvah, when it comes to Amalek, you should eradicate the memory of Amalek. Why do we have to add the idea to remember? Means if the memory is only leading up to the main part of the mitzvah, which is eradicate them, so why do you have to mention it? Why is that a mitzvah at all? It should just be a part of the completion of the mitzvah, which is eradicating Amalek, not a specific mitzvah, as is mentioned in the Rambam, to remember what Amalek did. So it seems like there's an idea of the memory of what Amalek has done, separate from the action of eradicating Amalek. The whole point of remembering what Amalek has done, that memory should lead to an action of eradicating Amalek. But we already have the obligation of eradicating Amalek. So what's this additional mitzvah? Meaning to say, we see clearly it's not a part of the mitzvah, it's its own mitzvah. So what is the idea? And obviously, what is the lesson? That we have an idea of remembering what Amalek did. The Rebbe continues. Generally, why do we have this obligation in general to remember something? What's this idea that people remember what happened? In general, anytime we emphasize the idea that one should remember something positive or negative, is that should lead to action. Remember what happened, remember what you did last time, so don't do this. The concern is that if not for emphasizing the necessity to remember what happened, and with time, that there's the concern is that if something happened a while ago and we want to remember, so we should avoid repeating the same issue, whether it's a mistake, what have you, positive or negative. So therefore, in order so to say the message, the memory should live on. We remember, so we shouldn't do or we should do, etc. As nemtim durach, the memory takes the person through, so to say, permeates through the person, so the person won't, in this case, do the negative again. It's so alive within you as if the incident happened now, and therefore the memory has an effect that you the desired effect of keeping the issue alive. And what's the outcome? That you're going to act on the memory. So the point of a memory in general is to keep the issue alive one way, for whatever the reason you want to keep it alive. So you should be able to continue to act on that issue, so to say we're off on you. Here the Rebbe says, for instance, when we make a fabrengen about something that happened in the past, for instance, he says, we have a mitzvah, remember what happened when we left Egypt. Although we've left Egypt thousands of years ago. The point is that when we constantly remember the Egypt, so the idea of Egypt is totally permeates through the person. What's the outcome? The remembering of Mitzias Mitzrayim, and why did we leave Egypt? So we should serve Hashem. Why did we go through Egypt? To receive the Torah. So this all helps in our actual today, in the performance of the Torah mitzvahs. So seemingly, that's the same idea. When it comes to Amalek, what's the idea of remembering what Amalek did? If we wouldn't talk about it so much, it would be another war, right? After a while. I remember when I was a little child, my parents had a book on the Holocaust. So right after the Holocaust, right away you saw that there was, in every gathering that he had, there was big ideas of Zochor, al Tishkach. Why? Because they were just going through the Holocaust, a horrible experience, to put it mildly, and they wanted that no one should forget, the generations should never forget what happened in Amalek. So he says, in the Holocaust, by us remembering what Amalek did, the idea is to take a lesson from that. The problem is when we don't take a lesson. But the idea of the memory is it should be alive within us. Hold on, Aaron. That what did Amalek do? They approached and tried to cool off the Jewish people on the way from leaving Egypt, going to Matan Torah. Amalek you were tired, and Amalek was not concerned to try to hurt the Jewish people. When you contemplate on that, in your mind, and it should not just be in your mind, it should heat up your heart in an excitement against Amalek. That will awaken within you the need to go to battle with Amalek, because it'd be hard to go to war. Saul went to war with Amalek. What was it? It was hundreds of years after the Jewish people left the Mitzrayim. If you wouldn't have it alive within you, it's hard to go to war for something that happened hundreds of years ago. To be able to fulfill the mitzvah of eradicating Amalek. Yes, Aaron.
Why can't we fulfill the mitzvah today using your example of the Holocaust? We know they're probably Amalek.
Probably is not enough of a reason, but also there's many reasons we can't do that. A is because of we don't know who Amalek is physically, because of the actual descendants of Esav, Sancheirav mixed everyone up. Number two is we don't have the political power to do that.
Okay, so now what can we do in place of that?
Okay, so we're going to learn. The Rebbe is addressing this question. What does Amalek mean? What does it mean to eradicate, to remember and eradicate Amalek today? So the Rebbe says, Amnam. This is the Rebbe said this would make sense if the Torah would not have given us clear conditions and laws regarding the war of Amalek. That we would need the memory to trigger the war. The Rebbe says, however, even if a person remembers actually what Amalek did, and your heart is full of passion about the experience of what Amalek has done to us, So this answers your question, Aaron. Means even if a person, the idea is that the memory should lead immediately to action. Continue to do Torah with excitement because you left Egypt. But the Rebbe saying, the Torah says, there's a condition. When do you go to battle with Amalek? The Torah says, after you've dealt with all your enemies from around. I'm not sure why there's no audio. Aaron's, hold on.
I can hear you, Rabbi.
I hear you.
Howard said there's no audio on the YouTube. Let me check a second.
That's a whole nother issue.
That's another issue. Let's see if I hear something here. I'm not sure why there's no audio. I think Howard, Aaron, if you could just type Howard that it's something on his side. So he has to maybe turn his volume up.
Okay.
So he says, in our case, so he says, even if you're going to remember Amalek good, and your heart doesn't get excited, it's not going to help. Why? The Torah gives a condition. That's going to be after Hashem gets rid of all your enemies from around you. In the land that God has given you as an inheritance, meaning in Eretz Yisrael. We know the laws of destroying Amalek comes in a system. First, you have to eradicate all the enemies around you. It has to be menucha. That you have to appoint a king. And then you have to get rid of Amalek. That's why the Torah never mentioned. We don't find any of the leaders of the Jewish people, the judges, Eli, etc., who told the Jewish people to go eradicate Amalek until Samuel appointed Saul as king, and then became the obligation only then fell in the obligation of eradicating Amalek. So the Rebbe says, so here's the question. One of the conditions, this answers your question, Aaron, for the Jewish people to go destroy Amalek is the Jewish people have to be in Eretz Yisrael in a way of tranquility, which we're not. And all the enemies, other enemies we've dealt with already. All of them, Daika. Not only a few of them, all of them. It's in a situation. It takes a time. It takes a while to reach that kind of tranquility that the Jewish people had in the time of Saul, although it wasn't David's times, but it was they got rid of the, let's say, the Plishtim issue, etc. Like I said, they were 300 years under the judges. They came into Israel. We don't find anywhere that there was a requirement for the Jewish people in the 300 years of the judges. And they had good times, but not great times. They had Samson, they had Devorah. But there was no mention from the judges or the prophets to go and battle Amalek. Only when we appointed the king Saul, and we learn about the appointment of Saul in the Haftarah, the Rebbe says even more than that. The Rebbe says even more than that. It's not even something that you could speed up. Hey, Howard, I'm not sure what the issue was on the YouTube, because I checked it on my phone quickly and I heard audio. So maybe it's going on and off. I'm not sure. The Rebbe said like this. So in when it comes to the battle of Amalek, so it says it's nothing you could do in your avoda to speed it up. This is dependent totally on when God is ready for you to do it, meaning when unto the will of God. What does the verse say? When God decides to get rid of all the enemies around you, not just when you come to tranquility, but when actually God decides to get rid of all the enemies, then you have the obligation to eradicate Amalek. Like it says, that God said he only came to tranquility when he came to the temple, which is the times of Solomon. Meaning to say that it's not; these are things that are not dependent on us. The war of Amalek is something. Means there's certain things that we try to hasten. There's certain things that when God is going to decide when it's time to battle Amalek. So, but the Rebbe is leading up to, obviously, is what's the point of this memory if it's not even dependent on you? The memory is supposed to trigger something. It's supposed to keep something alive for a reason. What's the purpose if it's not even up to you how you're supposed to take to move forward with that memory? Because this is all dependent totally on God. Everything's dependent on God. But God tells us that this is dependent on God. Meaning to say, not that you have to hasten it. There's nothing we could do. We don't find any conversation in the Judges or before Saul that there was an idea to go and eradicate Amalek. What's the whole point of this commandment? To remember what Amalek did. If memory is supposed to trigger an action. There's nothing you could do. So if you can't do anything about it, what's the point of this mitzvah to remember? It's not going to trigger it. It's not going to lead to anything. To actualize on this memory, to do something about it. To go fight with Amalek, which again addresses your question, Aaron. What's the point of today of us going out there and trying to remember constantly what Amalek did? You look around you and say, we could try to identify Amalek. It's not up to us right now. Until God decides to really get rid of all the enemies around the Jewish people. Obviously, there were different levels of tranquility in the history of the Jewish people, but the Judges was not a time for that kind of action. So the Rebbe is leading up to what is in it for us? What's the lesson of the idea of the memory of Amalek? Memory is supposed to lead to something. We see that when it comes to Amalek, there's a mitzvah itself in the memory of it, which is unique about Amalek. So that's what the Rebbe is getting to. So what's the answer? What's the explanation? The Rebbe says like this: Yidua, it's known. The talk of my father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, Oidis ish tzava, about with regard to army soldiers, to soldiers. One of the conditions for the morale of the soldiers is that you don't wait for victory. When you go out to war, you go out to war with a marching with that kind of energy, that high morale. What's the basis of that march? Meaning the marching out to war is the certainty. When the soldier is certain, and that's required. You must have confidence and certainty to go out to war. If you're going out to war with that lacking confidence, that's why when it comes to the laws of war, the halach is very clear about anyone. We get rid of anyone who's going to hurt the morale and hurt the confidence. Why? Because that brings down the ability for the success. The Rebbe says seemingly, the Torah tells us you can't basically praise someone who has potential to do something as if someone who's done already. So how the soldiers marching with confidence and certainty? You haven't fought the war yet. You're only going out to battle. You don't know exactly how it's gonna work out. How are you marching with this confidence as if you have already won the war? We didn't even start the battle. What's the point of going out with a march of victory when you go out to war when you didn't even start the war? Especially you don't even know how the war is going to work out. And the very fact that you're in battle with an enemy, it's obviously there's an issue here. The idea is when we go out with a march of confidence, when we go out to war, it's not that you're praising. The word hishalulus comes from the word halel. We're praising something as if we've completed it. This is part of the prep for the war. The condition to be successful in the war is to go out with the march. The fact that you walk out with such confidence and attitude, that walking out to the war, going out to the war with the song of victory, with confidence and certainty, with obvious conclusion, that you're going to be victorious. This itself, this confidence itself, is what empowers the soldiers to actually be successful. That's how important the morale and confidence is for soldiers. So too in our case. This is the idea of why do we have Zochor? The question again, why is there a necessity for remembering if the memory itself doesn't lead right away to battle? So the same point over here in our case. Even though the Torah says that what are the conditions to actually go out to the war of Amalek is the time when Hashem decides that the enemies are going to be subdued, and you have the ability to go ahead and to go out there and go into the battle. Nevertheless, Alpha became a person may think this has nothing to do with me. It means I sit there and I'll wait. When God decides to get rid of my enemies, then we'll pick up our guns and pick up our swords and go fight Amalek. We have to know that there is a level of avoid over here. There's a level of our participation. What do we have to do? You have to go out and fight all your spiritual enemies around you up until you get to Amalek. You want to be able to be in a situation where you're holding, that you're calm, all the enemies around you have been subdued. Go out there and deal with all the issues outside of Amalek. How can I go out there and fight all my other spiritual battles around to be able to be in a situation where I'm ready now to fight Amalek? Since Amalek is the first of nations that attacked the Jewish people, what is the root of all the nations that have the chutzpah to battle with Yiddishkeit, with Judaism and God and Jews? It comes from Amalek. How do you get rid of? So the Rebbe says it goes in the sandwich. How do you get rid of Amalek actually? Is getting rid of your enemies around you. How do you get rid of the enemies around you? Look at the source of their enemies. Where do the enemies come from? They come from Amalek. Amalek is the Reishis Goyim Amalek, the first of the nations that attacked the Jewish people. So you have to first go attack Amalek beruchnias, spiritually, by days and through attacking Amalek in what their spiritual message is against the Jewish people. That's going to get rid of our enemies around us. And then get rid of enemies around us is going to allow us to deal with the Amalek physically. By days that getting rid of the root of the problem is going to automatically help us get rid of the consequences of the problem. And then we're going to be Zochor to do the mitzvah of eradicating Amalek. So therefore, and the Rebbe is going to explain what he's getting at. The Churei movement seemingly doesn't make sense. What's this whole idea of talking about a spiritual battle of Amalek? The Torah doesn't say there's a spiritual battle of Amalek. The Torah says there's a physical battle of Amalek. You need to physically eradicate Amalek. Like the Haftorah says, Samuel didn't tell Saul to go and have a farbrengen to tell everyone how to get rid of the Amalek within them. Samuel told Saul to go out and kill Amalek. They actually went out and fought Amalek. What's the connection between the spiritual battle of Amalek and the physical battle with Amalek? Why do we need to first deal with the spiritual Amalek in order to be in a situation that brings to getting rid of our enemies from around us, both spiritually and physically, to being allowed to actually fulfill the mitzvah of destroying Amalek physically? Another question that Rebbe says, we could ask about the question on the story of Purim. It says about Purim, it says specifically this idea that we mentioned all the time throughout Torah of the idea of remembering a miracle, living the moment, reliving a story. It's mentioned by Purim. By the days of Purim, it says in the Megillah, Niskarim, by remembering them, V'nasim, we do them. As it's known, the famous explanation of this statement, Kasher Niskarim, when you really relive a story in your memory, Kidabai properly, that makes that the story should re-happen again, right? What happened in the story of Purim? Haman wanted to destroy the Jewish people. Really get involved, plug yourself into that story of how Haman tried to destroy the Jewish people, and through tshuva, through the Jewish people fasting and tshuva and Esther and Mordechai, the Jewish people were able to flip the story. So Nasser, that's what's going to happen today. But you have to actually relive that memory. The Rebbe says seemingly on that idea, there's a question. How by remembering what happened on Purim does that actualize that nasim, that as if the days of Purim are happening now? The difference between remembering something and doing something is like the difference between something spiritual, which is like a memory, it's a concept, to something physical, which is an action. How could he say that the Megillah says, by remembering the story of Purim, in a proper way, as I nasim bepoil, then we have the outcome physically of what happened in Purim. The idea is, this is the way the world runs. The way when you see things in this world happening, right? Why are things happening this way? You have to know with certainty that this is all an outcome of how things are spiritually in the higher realms of the world. Means if you have a problem down here, you have to look into the higher realms of what's the problem, right? When the Alter Rebbe was arrested in Yitzhak Kislev, he right away examined what was the problem spiritually, that it came out that he was arrested physically. Because the fact is, whatever happens physically in this world, is because it's an outcome of some spiritual situation above. It's not just spiritual, a little out of the physical realm, all the way to the depth of the highest world of Atzilus. Even though the world of Atzilus is the world of absolute unity, where there's no bad, there's no negative, there may be a little bit components, but it's the world of absolute unity of godliness. God and his lights and his vessels are one. Parsais Masachim Yimshchu Mimenu Hayam Kfi Shein Ba'ilmais Haruchim Shlamati Menu. Hashem wants that through different screens and separations, it should come out an effect in the lower world, what's happening in the higher worlds. And there's an outcome. So if there's a correction that needs to be done spiritually, that correction is going to show itself physically for us to understand that there's something that has to be corrected all the way at the source. And because we know, and we are certain as Jews, and we have amunah, that anything in this physical world is an outcome of what's happening spiritually. So when it comes to the nations and Amalek, the issue that we're having, the issue is not because Amalek is down here and hates the Jews. There's a message of Amalek that has to be fixed spiritually in order to tackle the issue physically. Mizeh moving, the Rebbe says, from this is understood. You look around you and you see anti-Semitism. You see people wanting to destroy the Jewish people. So you don't go out there and say, maybe I have to have a conversation, explain them I'm not such a bad person. Look inwards and say, what enemies do I have within me that I haven't dealt with, I haven't tackled? Spiritually, that this is an expression of my spiritual enemies. It means if I'm living within myself, with the struggle within myself, I'm not dealing with my issues, so that's why it's expressing itself and projecting itself in the enemies on the outside. When you see that you have enemies around you, when you deal with it in spiritual, starting with what Amalek represents, which we know the coldness, the doubt of Yiddishkeit. When you go out and you battle that doubt, don't allow for Amalek to get its teeth, so to say, into your mind and into your rotzen, into your wants. Then all of a sudden, the enemies around you physically go away. And then you're in a situation that you could feel eradicate Amalek. So that's what it means that Hashem is waiting. You means you what the Nakuda, what the Rebbe is saying over here is, and to go a little further, the Nakuda the Rebbe is saying over here is that there's certain things you can do and certain things you can't do. This is when the pasuk says that God is going to get rid of your enemies. That's in the physical sense, but you have to look in the spiritual sense. What is the things that I can do? What you can do is deal with the enemy within you. That is within your strength. And when you're going to deal with the enemies within you, then God is going to get rid of the enemies from around you, and then you're going to have the opportunity to take care of Amalek physically as well. And how do we start with dealing with Amalek within us? Reishis Goyim Amalek, the beginning of Amalek's message. It starts off Zochor Tzisha Aslach Amalek. Now it goes back to the original question. You have to remember what Amalek did. The Rebbe says, a person may think, what's the point in thinking about what Amalek did? What's the point? I can't go on battle with Amalek. Amalek, like we said before, we don't know who Amalek is. We don't have the power to battle with Amalek. What's the point of talking about Amalek? When we're holding Mashiach's times, like the Rambam says, we'll start dealing with Amalek. Like the Torah says, that God has to get rid of all the enemies around us. And then we can start dealing physically with Amalek. So the Rebbe says, what did we say before? What does memory do? Memory awakens an emotion, heats up the heart in an emotion, whether it's a positive memory or a negative memory. A person responds to that emotionally. And that awakens to say, 1 second, what does Amalek mean to me personally? There's the spiritual Amalek within me. And only because you remembered, and it awakened within you the issues that you have to deal with, that will bring you to the situation that you could deal with the issues of Amalek physically. Therefore, the Torah has to tell us, remember what Amalek did. Remember there's a concept of Amalek within you. Contemplate about this. Not just sitting it down as a conversation in an external way. Generally, specifically. When did it happen? When was I vulnerable? What was the vulnerability that I went through? You were tired. He found you at your weak moment. Who was Amalek? They had no fear of starting up with God. All the details the Torah tells us. What does it mean you didn't fear God? We learned this in the Maimer of Torah. Pare says, I don't know God. If I would know God, then we would have another conversation. Therefore, you can't blame Pare. You want me to fear God? I never heard of God. I only heard of Elohim. I know of the way God runs within the world. You tell me there's a power of godliness above the laws of nature. I'm not familiar with that. It doesn't say he doesn't know. He could call foul and say, what do you want from me? I don't know. He doesn't care. Amalek knows of the existence of God. Knows that he's called the Master, the Lord. Meaning God has the ability to actualize what he wants, his ratzain, as it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch, the definition of Elikim. V'afal pikein doesn't change the facts on the ground. He doesn't care. He's not fearful. He knows your strength. He knows God's strength. He knows what God wants. He doesn't fear God. He doesn't say he doesn't know God. What does it say about Amalek? He knows his master. And he intentionally goes out to rebel against him. That's Amalek within us. He doesn't only know that God exists in a concept. He knows that God is his master, personally. His master. Notwithstanding of knowing that God is his master, that doesn't stop the fact and it actually entices him to rebel against God. Not only does he just loses and goes against his will. He's not doing it by mistake. Intentionally. He's saying it's not that he's doing it intentionally because he's weak to a desire. I know God doesn't want me to do this, but I'm weak. Amalek is not weak. Amalek says, I know you don't want me to do this, and that's specifically why I'm going to do it. When you think about this, what does that awaken within yourself? When you can identify the character and the intentions of Amalek, what does that tell you? I want to get rid of Amalek. Amalek has nothing to do with me. I can't be a person who identifies, allows for anything of Amalek to have a connection to my existence. What does it mean to battle it? Levata le'inyan the sharkarchem and lashon krius. You got to get rid of the coldness. It's a deep coldness and calculated carelessness that Amalek installs within us. You know God, it means if male a person is weak and gives into an avera is one thing. Amalek's intention is literally, I know there's a God, I'm looking to go against him. He cools off the Jew and tells him, I see the miracle. I know that you're talking about a miracle. I know what you're talking about. It's not like I'm not aware of the miracle. I've seen the miracle. Who cares? You're saying that God did a miracle? That's not a big deal for God. God is, of course, he can do whatever he wants. You want to act on God's miracle? Why should you act on God's miracle? Amalek, but what is what he's saying? The Rebbe is saying is a very deep idea. What Amalek is saying means a lot of times, why do we get excited about a miracle? It's because it's shocking to us. It's the wow factor. Wow, I didn't expect this to happen. It's a miracle. So what's Amalek do usually? So that's everyone's excited. Everyone wants this Hashem Hu Elikim, right? That's what happened. Eliyahu made a miracle. Everyone said Hashem Hu Elikim. What's Amalek say? 1 second. You know who God is, right? God could do anything. So what changes just because he did a miracle? Nothing changed within God because he did a miracle. So I all of a sudden are responding to God now when he did a miracle. He's the same God who did before the miracle. He was always able to do the miracle. He creeps into your head and twists your whole response emotionally to a miracle. And what's the big deal that God did a miracle? God can do whatever he wants. He created the world. Amalek tells you. He rules the world. He can do whatever he wants. So what does Amalek say in the form of the evil inclination? So what are you getting excited about? The splitting of the Red Sea. The existence of the Red Sea comes from God. The nature of the Red Sea, that it should flow, comes from God. So he decided to split it. Why all of a sudden does that change things for you? Why aren't you, if you're excited, Amalek tells you, why aren't you excited when you see the river flowing? That's also a miracle. Nervous, you want to get excited about something changes. You shouldn't get excited from change. Change is only exciting if it shouldn't be that way or can't be that way. If it's something wondrous, there's no wonder here. There's no wonder. Maya Rashkokach, what's the Gewalt? And as he continues, which I have to end, so I'm just going to finish this last piece. It says that the word of God always stands within creation. The Rambam teaches, the Baal Shem Tov teaches, brought down in the second part of Tanya, that it's the word of God that constantly keeps the world in existence. It's a miracle every second. God every day renews creation, otherwise it wouldn't exist. So all of a sudden you're excited because this second he did it in such a way that the river doesn't flow, that the sea doesn't run, that the sea splits. What's the big deal? It's not flowing like it regularly, naturally does until now. There's no wonder here. God can get rid of the sea in the first place. The whole existence of the sea is miraculous. God doesn't even have to do an action of withdrawing the energy. He just has to stop giving the energy. The whole Yamsuf wouldn't exist. What are you getting so excited about? And the Rebbe continues, obviously, with this message that the idea is that this twisted ideas that Amalek is trying to twist within us and trying to doubt us. You have to. What's the bottom line for Amalek is the outcome. He's not here to argue. He's not an arguer. He's a person who wants results. And what's the results? That if I'm not excited about God, so then I don't have to serve God. He wants to. He's looking for results. He'll do any arguments. He's going to argue and tell you. He's going to argue and tell you that the miracles is not a big deal. Why? Because God can do anything. So why are you responding now? What do you wake up this morning all of a sudden so excited? And yesterday, when you were breathing, calling Hashem Tal Yukai, the fact that you're alive, that wasn't a miracle, and therefore you're able to do whatever you wanted, and only now you're about to change your behavior. So seemingly he has a good argument. So therefore you have to eradicate that, because you have to know where he's coming from, and you have to know what his agenda is. His agenda is to bring you down. His agenda is not to make you holier. His agenda is to stop you from working and serving Hashem. And therefore he has to be out of your conversation. That's not the way you're going to you're going to serve Hashem. All right, it's a shame we couldn't finish the Sicha. I got to run, people. Laila Tov, good Shabbos. We should have a meaningful Shabbos Zochor. Take
Good
care.
Shabbos, Rabbi. Thank you.
You're welcome.